pushing for a complete overhaul. Zambia's already reached a deal with its creditors, including China, to restructure $6.3 billion in loans. Our Caroline Lambele tells us more.
Amid the flurry of pledges and promises at the summit on reshaping global finance, Ugandan climate activist Vanessa Nakate took to the stage in Paris just after French President Emmanuel Macron. She urged leaders to think about the human impact of the climate crisis.
I would like to begin by asking all of us to hold a moment of silence for people around the world, those who are already helpless, hopeless, and dying due to the devastating impacts of the climate crisis.
Around 40 world leaders are attending the summit, including about a dozen from Africa. They're focused on tackling poverty and climate change issues by reshaping the global financial system. Senegal has already struck a deal with wealthier countries for an initial $2.7 billion in finance to develop renewable energy and speed up its transition to a low-carbon economy. A similar agreement was sealed by South Africa in 2021, but in Paris, the country's president said it had fallen short.
And we found this to be a pioneering deal, quite historic, in that an amount of $8.5 billion was committed to support our transition to clean energy. Actually, we're going to need much more, up to $98 billion.
The head of the World Bank also announced it was planning to allow countries facing a crisis to suspend their debt repayments. Several other deals are expected before the summit's end on Friday.
So with me now is Jorge Moreira da Silva, the Executive Director of UNOPS. That's the UN's Office for Project Services, which works across Africa and elsewhere to boost sustainable development infrastructure. He also used to head up development cooperation for the OECD and was Portugal's Minister for Environment and Energy. So, George, thank you so much for coming in to speak to me. You know, you're in a really unique position to be able to have an overview of the importance of this summit. And you were at the first day of the talks today, and you were telling me that, you know, these things can be quite dry from the perspective of the ordinary viewer, but that you felt whilst being there that it was really quite energized, and that you were particularly impressed by, you know, some of what was being said by the young lady that we just heard from, Vanessa Nakate. So why do you think that it's so important for Africa, and that you felt so impressed by the energy of the conversations being had here in Paris?
Thank you, George. Indeed, I was impressed by the energy, because very often in this kind of summits, especially if the jargon is about global finance pact, you can very quickly get trapped into the traditional jargon and technocracy language. That was not the case. I think that Vanessa Nakate was very impressive in bringing development to the core of today's conversation. So it was not about finance, it was about the role of finance in support of those most in need. I also think that the way that President Macron and also the Prime Minister Mia Mottley addressed the audience was putting all of us in the action mode, with the UN Secretary General also bringing his bold perspective of the reform of the system. Mia Mottley said that she calls this summit the "How Dare You" summit.